This is the Truth Network.
Hidden treasures of the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. How fun. We get to dig into the first verse in chapter 3 today as we're beginning a new chapter actually in our study, which is really, really cool. So as we enter into the third chapter, I thought I would share my suppositions with you. Number one, that we were studying the Song of Songs in an effort to understand better the statutes. As we finished our study in Psalm 119, the idea that David made time and again of, teach me thy statutes, which clearly have to do with our proximity to the Lord and our marriage to the Lord. And so what better than the Song of Songs? Because, there's a relationship to song in that as well. And so, we're definitely seeking to understand the statutes, but also as we realize that there are 8 chapters in the Song of Solomon, and the idea being marriage, that it seemed to line up with the letter Het, which is the 8th letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the miracle letter, some people say, and it has to do with our union with God. And so if we follow along with that logic, then we would be doing the other 7 letters of the alphabet on our way. So we start off with the first section being the Aleph, and we discussed that a lot during the first chapter. And the second chapter we finished yesterday with the idea of the Bet and the house that we feel like Jesus was building by, coming after his bride. And so now we would reach the letter Gimmel today as we are heading into the third chapter. And the idea of Gimmel, to a great extent, is to prosper. And so it's going to be interesting to see what all we learn about that letter and statutes as we dig into this chapter. And certainly this verse is along those lines. I think you'll see that. So to read it in English, verse 1 says, "By night on my bed I sought him, whom my soul loveth. I sought him, but I found him not." And so, clearly there's a couple times that we're seeing seeking, right? Because to sought is to past tense of have sought, have seeking, however you want to put that. And so, that idea that Jesus talked about, that seek and ye shall find. Well, at this point in time, she sought twice but didn't find. And then it's interesting, by night on my bed. And so as I was studying this, the word bed, it has got a lot of sexual ramifications to it. And there's no doubt that that is part of what, a marriage is a marriage bed. And so here she is on her bed, and she is longing for her communion with her beloved, and he's not clearly there. But interestingly, when you think about this with the idea of prosper, that in order to prosper, you have to seek, right? And, what a neat thing for me personally is I just this week realized that, I had asked God every year for a word of the year, and for the last number of years, I've been on this trek where the word that I got, I think it was 4 years ago, was prosper. And so that has everything to do with the letter Gimmel. And then, interestingly, the next thing, it was love like God, which is the letter Daled to some extent, because the beloved, right, is that Daled, Vav, Daled we've talked about through all this. And so what I was realizing is that God had given me these letters in order, like the Gimmel, then the Daled, and then the Hey would be to engage. And then this year, my word for the year is delight. And so, as I started to think about how is the Vav connected to delight, when you read the Vav section, right, you'll see that there's plenty of delight that happens in that in the 119th Psalm. So the idea that I found in spending a year on prospering, and the idea of the letter Gimmel, was that it's very much connected to him who asks, receives, right? And this idea of seeking, and oh my goodness, is that, in order to really enjoy our gifts, it helps if we have to have some anticipation, is all I have to say. Well, maybe not all I have to say, but anyway, that, Christmas Day just ain't the same without Christmas Eve. If you're a little boy and you're hoping for a bike, or in my case, I was hoping one time for this Army set that I was really, 300 and some odd pieces, and would have these missile launchers, and all night long I had visions of sugar plums dance through my head. And then when I got up Christmas morning, and there were those toys laid out, it was that much sweeter. Had I just gotten it as soon as I wanted, it didn't have the same effect. And so, there's nothing like earning, or not earning, but really, really wanting, and then it being provided. And so we see here, and we're going to see through the next couple of verses, that there's a whole lot of seeking going on. And the fact that it's in this bed, I think is kind of another thing that I want to land on here, is the word bed in Hebrew starts with a mem, and the second letter is a shin. Now, that combination is extremely powerful, because when you say Mashiach, you can hear a mem and a shin, right? And in fact, when you say Moshe, which is Moses in Hebrew, again, you're hearing a mem and a shin. And so, fascinatingly, I don't know if you ever thought about the connection between Mashiach and the idea of the anointing, and the idea of Moses being drawn out of the water. And all these things begin with that letter mem, and then they have a shin. And so interestingly, very interesting, so does your bed, okay? Has this mem and then a shin. And so you can see the power of that, and the power of what happens, right? As we're going to build this house, in order to prosper, we got to have a marriage bed, right? Because otherwise, how are you going to have children? That's how that works. And so, it's very interesting to me that here we find, as we're fixing to enter into this idea of prospering the house, and I think that you'll see that this bed is not the first time it's going to get mentioned in this chapter, but it starts out right here, right? As we enter into this idea of prospering and the marriage bed. And what an amazing thing, if you think about, obviously many of us have, anticipated our marriage night, right? And what a beautiful, beautiful thing. Nothing like picturing the wedding supper of the Lamb, right? And the prosper that's going to happen at that particular event. But, every bride, they wonder about that night. And here we are. They're still, at this point in time, in their relationship, in the Gimmel section, or in the third chapter, she's not got the one her soul loveth. But then we even think about that. What a neat thing that she says. I sought him whom my soul loveth. It's a beautiful thing when you even think about that. Obviously, as Solomon was writing those words, his soul did loveth Jesus. And he got to see that in spite of some of the mistakes that Solomon made in his life. But here he understood what it's like to be without Jesus, because he found him not. And again, we're gonna go on further in this, but I don't want anybody to miss the idea that in order to find, we first have to seek. And in fact, the first place you find grace in the word in the Bible is there when Noah came, and it says that Noah found grace in God's eyes. Well, in order for Noah to find grace in God's eyes, he first had to be looking for it. And so, the question is, as I was talking about the dream that I had here a couple episodes, and how I sought Jesus and didn't find him that night until I'd recited a whole bunch of the verses. In other words, the harder you have to look for something, the better it is when you find it. And you remember Jesus talked a few parables about that idea, that, man, when you really, really, really search and then you find it, then there's a lot more value to what it is that you're looking for. And so what anticipation we have as we go into this prospering of this relationship in the third chapter of the Song of Solomon.